This is Jeeves, and welcome to How Can Faith Help Promote Feminism? Our studio guest for this discussion was Georgia Boroda. She's the Interfaith Officer for the Union of Jewish Students. Throughout the discussion, she was very charismatic, energetic, and really clear in her analysis of the issue. To give you an outline of the conversation, we begin by defining feminism. We talk about gender bias present within religion, but of course we talk about methods that religion can help tackle gender inequalities. Whether God has a gender is also discussed, and whether feminism is its own religion. As always, the views expressed in this podcast do not reflect those of Faith Forum for London and the Union of Jewish Students. Enjoy. Let's get straight into it.
Okay.
I want to start with exploring the word feminism.
Okay.
It might be the ex-uni student in me, but let's define the term before we begin. I take it for myself to mean equality between the sexes.
Yes.
And on that definition, I am definitely a feminist. If I had a daughter, when I have a daughter, I'll tell her to smash any sort of standards or limitations that society
the patriarchy.
Exactly tries to put on her. So why do politicians, this is one thing I'm confused about.
Yes.
Why do politicians sometimes go around it when asked, are they feminists?
I think a lot of it is obviously maybe the generational. They associate the ideas of feminism not with the basic definition of equality, which essentially feminism is, but the more radical concepts. People are probably more hesitant to commit to feminism because they're worried of how they might be perceived, what it actually means in practice. And I do think it's a real shame because ultimately we should all be feminists.
Is the definition sometimes misunderstood or misinterpreted?
I think sometimes it's not even the definition that's understood, but like how it should be put into practice is what's misunderstood. People might not want to commit to being an active feminist, advocating for equality because of what it means to them. Would they lose their power and their platform? But also, again, people associate it with such radicalism, which I'm sure there is an element of it that is true and is needed, but people don't want to commit too closely to something that they think will completely change and undermine like the fabric of society.
I think though with like every sort of concept, whether that be feminism, there is going to be an element of radicalization because at the end of the day it is interpretation. When it comes to interpretation, people are going to have a more strong sort of interpretation as opposed to a more moderate one, which most people do have. So on that sort of definition that we said before, equality between the sexes, I think most people would be feminists. Absolutely.
I agree that like it does seem radical, but I think that's such a shame that as we define it as equality of the sexes is seen as such a radical concept. I think it's just so deeply embedded in society, like social inequality, sexual inequality, that people think equality is so radical and something they can't commit to or want to get involved in.
I do want to tackle this head on as well because people get confused between the distinctions between sex and gender.
Yes.
So gender is a social construct as opposed to sex, which is a biological trait?
Yeah, kind of. That's like the very like surface definition, but there's also there's discussions about like sex also kind of being a social construct. People that are intersex that don't necessarily biologically feel like they don't fit in those like binary categories. So I guess that's kind of what like on the surface people use like gender as the construct, and like because gender means something different in each society, whereas sex, like people see that as the scientific biological difference.
When we explore the sort of relationship between religion and feminism, a lot of people who will be listening to this podcast see the title, How Can Faith Help Promote Feminism? They'll be thinking faith in itself has some institutionalized gender bias.
It's really difficult because there's so many points in life where I think the same. I've really struggled with like Judaism and being a proud Jew, but also being a feminist and how to reconcile the two. Because I do think there are elements of religion that are institutionalized sexism, like just in Judaism, for example, we recently had Simchat Torah, which is where we start reading the scroll again. And at uni, how this is put in practice, it's a massive party, everyone gets really drunk, so it works really well in uni. But the men dance with the Torah, which is the Jewish book, and the women just sort of stand on the outside and just watch what's going on. And obviously this isn't that institutionalized, there's obviously more elements to it, but like just in practice, there are times where you do feel as a woman in a religious space that there are things that you don't have access to. There is inequality. So I would definitely tell people that it's a valid point, it's a valid concern, it's something that should be questioned. However, not to completely disassociate the two and not completely ignore the fact that there are elements of faith that promote feminism and elements of feminism that can really work within faith spaces.
So I get a little bit confused because there's obviously different forms of Judaism as there is in all sorts of faiths. So you've got progressive Judaism and you've got a more traditional Judaism.
Yes.
Do you mind sort of differentiating the two, especially when it comes to feminism as well?
Yeah. So Orthodox Judaism, that I guess in the title it kind of gives it away. They really stick to the words of like God's words and the Torah, and they don't sort of adapt it to modern society. They really follow the book of Moses and the instructions of the rabbis that have come previously and apply that to their practice in life. There's also Masorti Judaism, and then there's also Reform and Liberal, and they're kind of part of the progressive movement, and they adapt the word of God and they're adapting Judaism to modern society. So for instance, in Reform Judaism, women can be rabbis because they still have rabbinical studies, same as the men do, and they're still following the Jewish, like law is the wrong word, but like Jewish traditions in that way. However, we now live in a more equal society than when the Torah was written and when it was first adapted. So they've adapted that element of traditional Judaism to the modern day and allow women to be rabbis, and liberal women also can be rabbis.
I hope you don't mind, but which sort of sect do you belong to?
It's quite interesting because I've always grown up in an Orthodox, but not strictly Orthodox. Like the thing they say in America that it's the Reform shul is the shul that you don't go to, and in Britain it's the Orthodox shul is the shul that you don't go to. So my family are Orthodox. That's like the movement they align with, but we're not too strict. We're not the best practicing Jews.
So just more open-minded.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So now we've tackled that.
Yes.
Let's talk about how religion can tackle these sort of gender inequalities.
Yes.
Because there are so many gender injustices that go on. I mean, you talk about the gender pay gap.
Absolutely.
You talk about equal representation, equal opportunity. You go in the workplace, even in Parliament.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not equal in terms of the reflection of society.
Even like the Me Too movement and stuff like that. There's things that women are experiencing in daily life that I think faith has a role in.
Definitely. I mean, in the workplace, domestic violence, culturally, I think religion can do so much.
Yeah.
So what would you say? What would you say that Judaism and faith as a whole can do? Maybe some initiatives.
Yeah, that's such an interesting question, and definitely one that's been debated by people way above my pay grade. But I think one of the things that's always stood out for me in Judaism is there's a story about this rabbi called Rabbi Akiva, and I think his students asked him, could they learn the Torah just like standing on one leg? And he said, yeah, you can, because the essence of it is just this idea of loving your friend as you love yourself. And if you go back to the definition of feminism as equality, just that very idea, if that's the essence of Judaism, and that idea of equality and treating everyone equally is the essence of feminism as well, then I just think looking at it from that perspective can really change people's minds about how they treat women in religious spaces. I guess if we're thinking about more practical ways that like religion can promote equality, well, it's really difficult. I guess even in like people's sermons and like on a Saturday, just making sure that like women are included, or women are asked to do certain things like on Friday night for Shabbat and stuff like that.
This isn't too religion focused, but what's your idea of feminism and chivalry?
Ooh, I guess it's all about consent, really. Like,
okay.
I don't think someone opening the door for you is particularly, I don't know, wouldn't offend me, and I identify as a feminist. However, I guess it's just about good faith. If you're coming from a patronising perspective and these archaic ideas of the role of a man and the role of a woman, then I guess that would be against feminism and feminist beliefs. However, if you're coming from a place of goodwill, if you believe that you stand on the road closer to the car because that's what you want to do, then I think there's ultimately nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I agree with you, because I think like on the tube, so you've just moved to London.
Yes.
when you stand up and say there's a lady there, it's not because she's any less able to stand. That's not why maybe someone would stand up, but they could still be chivalrous in the sense that, you know, it's just a nice thing to do, goodwill. Maybe they're younger, like we're 21, maybe we could maybe
give our seats up.
Yeah, I don't know, is that ageist now? I don't know. But no, definitely. So I think there is a distinction there between feminists, and I think maybe that's the more extremist side of feminism. Would you agree with that?
I don't even know if it's the more extremist side. It just really is. I think people use it as a bad faith argument against feminism.
Yeah.
People say, "Oh, you want to sit down on the tube, so therefore." But like, ultimately, you're right. Like, it doesn't mean women are less able. A part of it is tradition, and like this idea of like, as I said, I just moved to London and I'm terrified of the tube traditions, like signing to the left, like making sure I give my seat up to the right person. I think a lot of that is embedded in it, which ultimately isn't bad faith, and I think that's therefore fine.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it is about intention.
Totally.
If you have a good intention, it's from a good place, then definitely do it.
Yeah. And I don't think any woman's going to shout at you for offering her a seat, even in the people who do really identify as radical feminists. It's just, I do think it's an argument that's used to try and undermine feminism and almost create like a fear that, oh, you don't want to stand up and offer your seat anymore because this feminist might shout at you. Like, that's just, I think that's very unlikely to happen.
Yeah,
I don't know. Don't prove me wrong.
To be fair, I've never seen that happen.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think maybe a good. To be fair, we've gone way off topic here. This is my fault. I shouldn't have brought it up. But I think maybe asking.
Yeah, it's like consent. Like it's just being
like you're saying, consent.
Yeah.
Rather than just maybe getting up and say, "Oh, you sit here." Yeah.
But ultimately, it should be like if you're walking through a door, just hold a door open for anyone. Like it can be very gender blind.
Exactly.
Like, no one's going to be offended.
But that's the thing, because I am actually quite ageist. So like it's like with my grandparents. So I'll always stand up for them, or if they've got friends. So I'll admit that on mic. I don't know.
No, the worst day ever was I offered my seat to a man who was older than me. That's the best way to describe it. And he's like, "Oh no, don't worry, you sit down. Is it you often because I'm old?" Like joking. I was like, "No." Like that's like I went to full on panic.
No, definitely. Okay, so going back to feminism and religion. So is feminism sort of its own type of religion?
I mean, obviously, it depends how you define religion. I guess in a way it's an organised belief in something. There's debate on it, which I find in Judaism is like a staple of the faith. Everyone has a different opinion on everything. It is interesting. How would you define religion? Like, what are the elements you would say make up a religion,
so
different to political belief?
Yeah, so this is my personal belief, but I think religion is a set of morals and values that you then live by. I don't know, do you necessarily have to spread those values and morals? But I would definitely say that it's a way of life that you believe, but I wouldn't say that religion necessarily I think most religions that I've explored as well just tell you to be a good person.
Yeah.
And I think feminism, the way that I see it, is a good movement, a great movement, and if you are a feminist, it makes you a better person.
Yeah.
So I would say they complement each other well.
Yeah.
But like we said before the discussion, there are a lot of maybe gender biases in religion that religion still needs to tackle. And look, there's a long way that every sort of concept or idea needs to go in terms of reaching and breaching these injustices in society. But I think I don't want to, promote this podcast, but podcasts like this, seeing how faith can help promote feminism.
Yeah, promote the podcast.
Plug the podcast on the podcast.
Also, I think the difference is, I would see it as, a religion is like, to me, cultural, obviously spiritual. They're like two staples of religion. Whereas I think, yes, feminism is a set of morals, good morals, I believe, that you can, and ways to live your life by, but there is also political elements to it, which I think are really important. Now, obviously, you could argue that like with the rise of like Islamophobia, anti-Semitism in the country, religion has sort of become politicized in that way. But I think the fundamental difference is religion was never, I don't know, this is what I think, never meant to be seen as a political movement, whereas I think feminism very much is.
How hard is it for religion to stay away from that political realm, though?
I think it's impossible. Yeah. Really impossible, particularly in the time. I mean, I have a history degree, so every time you live in is a time that every period of time is a time of crisis. Like, but if you were looking at it from like now, I think it is really difficult, particularly when religion is being brought into like the political sphere because of the increase in hate crimes against people like with people with political beliefs. Even, you know, going back to like my grandparents' era, how Judaism was brought into the politics of countries and like creating a national identity where religion falls within that. I think ultimately it has just become they can't get out of politics.
No, it can't, and I think that has to be maybe accepted. So now we're going to move on to sort of God and whether she has a gender, whether they should be considered gender neutral. The reason I ask is a lot of people believe that if faith was to consider God gender neutral, that may be a huge step in promoting feminism.
Yeah, I totally agree. Although I do subscribe to Ariana Grande's belief that God is a woman. No, I'm joking. I just had to get her in there.
What a two.
I do think that the idea of gender neutrality does promote feminism. It particularly as God is gender neutral, but does promote feminism. It's difficult because in Hebrew it's a gendered language, and that's the language we use to like pray. So when we don't know gender, I've always hated this, but you assume it's a man. So just in that, even just things like that have always, since I was like in reception, have always really annoyed me. And I do think it just embeds this idea and this idea of who God is, that you associate him with masculinity and being a man. And yeah, I would like to get away from that.
But you're right, I think it's a language. It's a language thing.
Language is so important.
Yeah, no, I think we need to recognise that, because like you say, it is this sort of embedded idea that God is a man, and in images you see, I mean, I'm thinking of the famous one where he's
was it the Da Vinci one in the Sistine Chapel?
Yeah, is that Da Vinci?
Is it Da Vinci?
Is it Da Vinci? To be fair, I went there in the summer, I should know this, but
yeah.
But yeah, so sort of Western ideas like that. I think that we need to maybe understand the restrictions that were there when sort of these religious scriptures were written, and like we were saying, the language restrictions. But in terms of gender neutrality, where do you think that faith fits in that debate?
I think faith has a long way to go when it comes to gender neutrality. I do think, as we said before, as a faith, I guess, about the Abrahamic religions, they are very male dominated, particularly in like who's the clergy person, who's leading the services. And I think ideas of gender neutrality within faith would promote like equality. I don't know, I guess I kind of do see like in Western society, it is kind of led by like ideas of Christianity. So I guess if faith was to adopt gender neutrality, then that would hopefully work to promote gender equality.
How far are we from that, though?
How far? Sadly, too far, I think.
In our lifetime?
I hope so. But like, it's ultimately what do we mean by gender neutrality? Like in Judaism, there's certain, like on a Friday night, there's like three main things that we do, which is we light the candles to bring the Sabbath in, we bless the wine and the bread, just traditionally, and the woman lights the candles and the man does the wine and the bread. And I was having this discussion in York, your old ends, last night about like if we want women to start doing Kiddush, which has traditionally been a male job, would men then start lighting candles? And, you know, reconciling tradition, but with the fact that we now live in the 21st century. And I guess it's like opportunity is the best way. I think that as long as everything that's being provided is provided to men and women, like, does it matter if it's a man reading from the Torah, as long as a woman's been asked would she like to, and as long as it's accepted and there's like a culture of acceptance of gender neutrality in like certain religious activities.
I agree with you, because I think a big critique of feminism that people would say is it just forgetting tradition?
And it's such a shame, because I think you can embed tradition into feminism. I ultimately don't think that it has to negate tradition, but also a part of me is like, traditions are really important and such, particularly in religion, but like, you know, get with the times, man.
Yeah.
Do you think, had people said that to you about like feminism being like too opposite from tradition?
No, but I think people, like you say, want to keep their traditions and maybe see it as a threat. But like we were saying, I think that's maybe a misconception again. And I think there are so many misconceptions when it comes to feminism.
Absolutely. Equality shouldn't be seen as a threat.
No, but I think this is what people worry about, because people think that maybe feminism is like radically going to change their life.
100%. And I guess as well, like with tradition, if you want to keep certain things with tradition, like it's not religiously, it's not like, I don't know, faith, it's not traditional to be anti-equality.
Yeah.
And I think that's also a misconception. Like, yes, there may be certain things that are like ascribed to men, ascribed to women, but like the like core of faith and that tradition in terms of like the morals that faith promotes, that as a tradition shouldn't like be opposed to equality, I think.
In terms of the gender biases in the Torah,
Yeah.
how is that when you go to the sermons and
Yes.
you listen to the Torah?
So I'm not gonna lie, I'm not the best scholar of the Torah, but just from what I really enjoy about the Torah, and I've always I've been to a Jewish nursery school, infant school, junior school, high school, sixth form, like I've had a lot of Jewish studies in that sense, and I've always really enjoyed like the story element of the Torah. Like each week we have a parasha that we read in shul, and that just details a different story from like biblical Jewish history. And there are as many incredible Jewish women figures from the Bible as there are men. And like, yes, like Moses is someone that everyone knows, Abraham, like they're big names, huge names. Yeah, literally, that everyone knows. And it's a shame that women have less recognition, but in gender balance in that terms, there's like Queen Esther achieved an incredible amount. Like Devorah is one of the prophet and the judges. There's a story of a woman called Ruth who led her people, and it's just stuff like that. I don't think there's any intrinsic inequality in the Bible and in the stories of the Torah.
I might be putting you on the spot here, but do you know any stories that you could tell our listeners?
So this is my fave. So basically everyone has like, well, not everyone, but like there's a tradition of like, obviously my name's Georgia, and then I have a Hebrew name as well.
Yeah.
And so it's Galia, which is like the Hebrew version of Georgia. And then my middle name's Devorah. And that Devorah is a woman who, it was a time when, in a biblical time, and the Jewish people were living under an oppressive king. Standard.
Can't remember, what was his name?
I think Jabin,
Okay.
I think. Okay. And people were really turning from their faith under this oppression, and the Devorah came about. She was a prophetess and a judge, and she used to hold her court under a palm tree in open air, so everyone could hear her. Her words are accessible, and because of this, she became a really beloved figure in the community, and she was able to inspire her people to go back to Judaism. And with that, she and her husband helped round up things like 10,000 Jews. And she's also a military strategic genius. And they planned the assault on the king, and they were able to overthrow the king. So just that's cool, military hero as well as a judge and a prophet. I
feel like we need to hear more stories like this.
We do. I think that's what faith, I guess we talk about how faith can promote equality, really putting a spotlight on the hidden histories. I'd like to say that with all minorities as well, how we're talking about the paintings before, and giving God a gender in paintings, making sure that it's not a whitewashed version as well, so people of colour can associate with religion like that, because ultimately these stories are taking place in the Middle East and North Africa. It's ridiculous how this blonde haired, blue-eyed version of God and Jesus that we see so regularly. And I do think promoting stories of women and these amazing historical figures does go a long way, because it is important to look up and idolize women. I think Queen Esther for Purim, everyone I knew wanted to dress up as Queen Esther because she was such a cool Jewish role model and someone to look up to. And once people reconcile that there's always been strong Jewish women who have been so involved in their faith and involved in the genesis of the faith, literally, then the people will feel like it's not a threat on their tradition, and feminism isn't against what has always been.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I love that story, by the way.
Yeah, it's sick.
A really good story. I've never heard it before.
Yeah, it's such a shame, isn't it?
I've never heard it before. And when I went to chapel, they used to, obviously this isn't Judaism, but they used to read the Old Testament, and they never used to. Yeah.
I think it's one of the prophets in one of those in the book is I don't know.
I'm not going to ask you for a verse.
I would not be able to tell you. But even just even if you don't know the exact verse, and just making sure that these female stories are at the forefront. I think as well, like, as I said, I have a history degree. We talked a lot about Hidden History Month and do they actually work? And the conclusion is yes, they work after, like, for at the beginning, but then it needs to become more mainstream. And I guess I'd like to see that in religion, like a promotion of marginalized people in, like, faith stories.
Do you believe in positive discrimination?
I think I do to a certain extent.
So could
until
faith,
equality.
could faith do more in terms of
100%? I think they could. Again, with stories and making, like, with opportunities, with making sure, like, spaces are welcoming. I do think there should be a conscious effort to.
What about more female rabbis, maybe?
I would love to see it.
Really?
Love to see it. Yeah.
What about yourself?
No.
No. Never thought about it?
Oh my God, no. My uncle's a rabbi, but no, apart from that.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
That's right. It runs in the family.
Yeah, literally. No.
Great. So I suppose I don't think we came to a conclusion of whether God, I mean, in Judaism, I'm guessing he's referred to as a he throughout.
Yeah. Throughout. Is it so, like, do you associate God as a man?
When I was younger.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people don't think of these sort of things when they are younger and you just take it for black and white. But then when you get older, you start to understand that there are bigger issues and everything that you say has a consequence. So if you just keep calling them he, keep calling them he, this creates an unconscious bias in kids' heads. And I think that we do need to change that. Maybe from an early age.
Yeah, I'd hope so. But also it's the idea, and, like, I don't know, in Judaism, it is an idea that, like, God makes everyone in his own image, and therefore there's no way he can be, like, a single gender. If, like, he's created everyone, like, everyone who's ever existed is created in his image, that would make absolutely no sense. So, like, yes, like, he is always referred to a he, but it's not, like, canon law. It shouldn't be anyway.
So there's another argument, but I think that this is an awful argument. What do you say to people who, so go back to the book of Revelations and Adam and Eve, and they say that, oh, Eve corrupted Adam to eat the fruit.
Yeah, but, like, so? Like, what? Like, that's something that, like, women have to pay for.
That's what I'm saying. It's ridiculous. But when I was doing the prep for this, when I was doing the prep for this last night, and I was on the where you type in religion and feminism, and they're like, well, you know, Eve has been corrupting man since, and you're.
It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I've never met anyone who actually believes that. Yeah. Maybe that's just the internet.
But then again, like, yes, no one actually believes that, but that is very much an idea that is literally the genesis of religion, that is very much inscribed in how women are treated. And even at the consequences, like, we learn about that when we were 4 in reception in nursery, about Eve and the apple and corrupting Adam, like that. Like, yes, no one actually literally believes that it's terrible, hopefully, that it's so, like, it's discussed, women are so terrible because look what Eve did to Adam. But, like, ideas of how, like, unconsciously about how ideas of, like, women are formed, and this idea of the Jezebel and someone terrible, it's really upset. It's, like, annoying.
What is a Jezebel?
I think it's, like, I don't fully know, but like it's over sexualized, like, manipulator. Okay. And I think that's informed, like, stereotypes and just, it's, like, sadly, like, unconsciously. And so I guess it has to be, like, spoken, like, Adam was his own geezer, like, he made his own choices as well, like, that needs to be promoted.
But that's the whole point. We want to say no to stereotypes.
Yeah 100%. And I think, unfortunately, they are informed by stories of religion that might sound ridiculous if you would say it to, like, in a normal conversation, but yeah, I think it's too ingrained in society. So
I want to also move from the distinction between religious and cultural bias.
Yeah.
So is there definitely a distinction there?
In terms of
gender inequality. So is it maybe not so much a religious bias, but a cultural bias that has been a misinterpretation of the religious text?
I think possibly. I do think the ideas of equality in, like, religious texts are I don't know if it's on purpose or not, but are like sort of forgotten in like cultural interpretations of religion. So I do think there are cultural elements of it, but then it's like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Like, what informed culture? Like, was that religion, or was it just culture informing how religion was interpreted? So I guess we'll never know.
So in terms of religion being feminism being its own religion,
yes,
I would probably agree that if it was like I was saying before, a moral value, a way of life, it is.
Yeah. I guess if that's why you see religion, then I guess it is kind of its own. I feel like it's not meant to be its own religion. I think it's meant to be something that exists outside of religion, but not like completely disassociated. But like it's meant to. It is a separate topic, but there's definitely similarities. I guess as people don't really worship, it's not really anything to worship. It's kind of just something to like aspire towards and to like fight for, which I guess religion is different in that sense.
Great. Before we go, would you like to say one last message? Put you on the spot here.
Happy Interfaith Week, guys.
Happy Interfaith Week, yeah.
Best week of the year.
Best week of the year. Plug for the Union of Jewish Students. They do a great job on all campuses. And yeah, plug to their Interfaith Officer who came on the podcast.
Yay.
How'd you find it?
It was good. It's really interesting.
So that was my discussion with Georgia on how can faith help promote feminism. Get in touch on Insta or Twitter at How Can Faith Help and let me know what you think. For our next podcast, we're at Imperial College to discuss how can faith help tackle artificial intelligence, and that's out tomorrow. Hope you enjoyed this conversation. Thank you to Georgia for coming on the podcast, and thank you for listening.